I titled today's conversation mind map, All Desire Points to That. All desire points to that. So, isn't that mind-blowing? A person can invest so much time in life to come to the realization of already being that which they desire to be the whole time. The illusion of not already being that then crumbles by grace and grace alone, blowing away, we can say it that way, all which does not represent that, giving rise to all which does represent that by grace and grace alone. This is what I would like to talk with you about today. Now we have on my screen here the Robert Dilts logical levels, which I modified by putting the I on the top. That I is you. That I, which is the pure awareness, that perfection is you. That fulfillment is you. Why I say that desire points to that, or all desire points to that, perfection or fulfillment, that which you already are, is because the person in mind, identified with conditioning, generates the illusion of looking outwardly to this world to determine what to think, how to act based on condition, and that condition does not necessarily represent the self. The self which is prior to the condition, which is that perfection, that fulfillment. So, practically speaking, then, we could use the Robert Dilts logical levels to articulate what happens when the individual knows that they are that prior to all these things, and also if the individual does not know that they are that prior to all these things. And these things include the physical world, the objects, people, environment, circumstance, information, the mental phenomena, the bodily phenomena, thoughts, emotions, all these things that appear to you. If the individual does not know that they are prior to all these things, they may form what is called a personal identity around these things. And no shame, no condemnation. See, that personal identity, which is a construct, ideally would be represented as the self, which is ever realizing. Yet, if the individual does not know the self prior to all these things, they may imagine that personal identity, which is here in the Robert Dilts logical levels, to be that of limitation, which is illusory. To be that of limitation, I am not that limitation. I am that prior to these concepts stored in the subconscious mind that make up the personal identity, which is clearly illusory and does not represent me. So what is the experience like which is built on the faulty foundation of not knowing the self prior to all these things? Well, if we look at the other layers of the Robert Dilts logical levels, we'll see values and beliefs represent lack or limitation. Us versus them, this versus that, dichotomous beliefs that generate resistance, stress, frustration. In relationships, for example, or in dating, the conditioning results in inharmonious relationships and inharmonious dating experiences. For example, rather than the individual being themselves, which is the self, be yourself, the self, here you are, prior to all thoughts of lack or limitation and experiencing another individual, they may identify with particular conditions and project those conditions, which are illusory, onto the other person and interpret the person to be this way or that way, which is not how they truly are. And they may interpret them more specifically based on that conditioning, because they don't know that that individual fundamentally is the self. There's only the self. To prove the point, what is the difference between your awareness and my awareness prior to body, mind, personal identity? There's absolutely no difference. And not only is there absolutely no difference, that pure awareness is infinite perfection fulfillment. So in other words, the individuals were seeking for the self, which they already are. That is who they are. They desire to know the self and manifest the self as harmonious relationships. So as I say sometimes, you are that complete fulfillment. You are that perfection, and you appear in consciousness. You appear in consciousness. I am that pure awareness appearing in consciousness to experience that fulfillment, perfection in form as all these things, as stated in the Bible. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And not only are they added onto you, they're added onto you by grace and grace alone. It does not appear as grace and grace alone through the conditioning, the lack, the limitation, the limiting beliefs, the limiting identity. Now, the capabilities. So these are things like skills. So for example, in relationships, we can call emotional intelligence a skill, or relating harmoniously a skill. For example, in business, we could say interpersonal skills. Now, when the individual knows that fundamentally there's only the self, only the self is real, and there is no other, thus there is no separation, the capabilities naturally manifest as what we can call emotional intelligence, or interpersonal skills, or relating harmoniously, or, as we used to say growing up, keeping it real, just being real with another human being, just being real. So on dates, for example, you show up and you don't put on an act. You don't put on a persona. You don't try to fake it or pretend to be someone you're not, because that is illusory. You know that you are that prior to all these things. That is what desire points to. You just desired to be who you are. You just desire for people to accept you for who you are. Now, who you are actually appears as all these things, as mentioned. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Which means I am that pure awareness. I am that. And my real nature is Ananda in Sanskrit, which means bliss, happiness, peace, joy. Sat Chit Ananda. Translated into truth consciousness bliss, or existence consciousness bliss. That is you. That is your real nature. How do you know it is your real nature? Well, have you noticed that you're on a date with someone and there are these thoughts of limitation appearing in mind, such as this person doesn't like me, whatever, this and that, projecting this and that onto the other person, rather than keeping it real, as we used to say growing up, just being real. The individual is playing all these psychological games, we can call it that, to pretend to be someone that they're not, try to be someone that they're not, put on a persona, buy all these things and dress this way, even though it does not feel natural. Now, this doesn't mean you should not go out and buy those things or dress in a particular way, etc. What I mean is that how you dress, what you drive, where you live, your hobbies, etc., ideally and naturally manifest by grace and grace alone, your style, which is the best style, from the sure foundation of already being that. So each individual has a distinct way of being, an individualized way of being. So then on a date or in a relationship, you just desire to be who you are. If you remain who you are and you don't change to try to impress another person, which is an illusory thing to do because that's just putting on a persona. So for example, let's say you crack jokes about particular topics, or you are interested in communicating in a particular way, etc. Rather than trying to behave like someone to impress another person, which is an illusory thing to do, because that's just identification with conditioning in order to get. You don't identify with that, and you just show up as you are, and you behave as you are. And as you know, by that is meant you are that prior to the conditioning. You behave as you are, and the real self shines forth as your style, your way of perfection or fulfillment. And you're not doing it to impress the other person. Now, if a person is looking at the interaction, they might say that. They might say, oh, that guy or that girl has a lot of charisma, confidence, personal magnetism. But they're not trying to be confident. They're not trying to be magnetic. They're not trying to be charismatic. That's just the natural fragrance of being, the real self shining forth. Now, it shines forth as their individual style, how they behave, what they do not do, what they say, what they don't say, how they act, how they don't act. They don't worry about these things because all these things happen effortlessly, naturally, and spontaneously in flow, just by knowing that they are that and abiding as that. Now, what does that mean, abiding as that? Because they're already that. So if you're already that, you don't need to abide as that. What I mean is you just do not identify with thoughts of lack or limitation. You already know that you are that which you desire to be prior to all these things. You are that pure awareness, and your real nature is bliss. So as mentioned, as you don't identify with these things, if there is, let's say on a date, thoughts of disharmony, emotions arising and subsiding, let's say a person behaves in a way where they shame and condemn themselves in that moment, they could know that they are that prior to all these appearances. And what permeates the mind, the body, and the experience? What we can call ananda, joy, happiness, peace, bliss. That's because you are completely fulfilled for no reason, beyond reason. You are that perfection for no reason, beyond reason. Now, it appears as all these things, yes. So all these things in life appear to be accessories of being. How you dress, how you speak, the kind of lifestyle you live. And interestingly as well, everything appears to be in harmony with you. So when you look at the last layer of the Robert Dilts logical levels, we see environment. Environment can be who you're with, where you go, where you hang out. Now, if a person looks at that, a person may say, oh yeah, they match that environment ideally. They're not pretending or faking to fit into this environment. They just fit into the environment. You know, like we used to say growing up, is he driving the car or is the car driving him? Or is he wearing the suit or is the suit wearing him? You naturally dress, you naturally act, you naturally speak, you naturally do your style, which is the best style, and people appear to be in harmony with you. They like your style. And it doesn't mean they're going to copy your style. They like your style because your style represents the truth, the absolute truth that you are already that. You could say if you'd like, that your presence and the appearances associated to the presence point to the fact that they are already that, and it brings out the best in them. And conditions fall away. So in dating, relationships, and business interactions, just any kind of interactions, family, friends, what we notice is upon surrendering these conditions to be the self prior to all these conditions, just not identifying with those thoughts that suggest lack or limitation in relation to behaviors, in relation to capabilities, in relation to environment, we can say then the values and beliefs transform. Yes, mind is purified from those conditions. And also, interestingly, by keeping it real, there you are that prior to all these things. By keeping it real, by just being real, they appear to be real. It's like, if you're real, they're real. But they were always real. It's just through the conditioning which distorts reality, it appears as us versus them. See, the person in mind may try to control things. They want this person to be this way or that way. Then they can be fulfilled. And we see that's just an illusion. They desire to know that they are fulfilled. Nothing wrong with that. They desire to know that they are that perfection. Nothing wrong with that. And all these appearances appear to transform. We could say it that way. They appear to transform to reflect the real self that shines forth. The real self that shines forth. Now, you may hear me say in the entrepreneurial space, the way I segment entrepreneurship is innovation, sales, marketing, operations, finance, leadership. And then I talk about how in these areas you can optimize, automate, delegate, eliminate part or in whole or in combination. I talk about that in my book, which I released earlier this year. If you're interested in that, I'll link in the description to it. I also speak about the prospecting, lead generation, client acquisition, and ongoing business with existing client activities that represent the revenue side of the business, bringing in the money, and then engaging in a relationship to provide your product or service for compensation. And then I also speak about the physical assets, the digital assets, the intangible assets, and the relationships that naturally emerge to play a role. And all these areas appear to be in perfect harmony. They just do not appear to be in perfect harmony, which is illusory through conditioning. So, how do we dissolve this conditioning if there is conditioning in mind? So we could be as is, be as that. Truth just is, be as is. That is perfection. That is that perfection. And you are that. And just by being as is, what happens is you witness experientially, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, as one, experientially. All these things appear to transform and be in harmony. As I always say, I see physical, emotional, and experience. Physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual as one. There is no separation. It's not this versus that. It's not this versus that. It's all one, and not just one. One in perfect harmony. One in perfect harmony. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the teachings of Adi Shankara or Shankaracharya. He's often known as the godfather or the pioneer of Advaita Vedanta. He was quoted oftentimes by sages like Sri Ramana Maharshi. Now, he summarized it into such simplicity, exactly what we're talking about here, that everything is in perfect harmony. It's not this versus that. Physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, in perfect harmony. So this is not about spiritual bypassing or mental bypassing or emotional bypassing or physical bypassing. He said, number one, Brahman is real. Number two, the universe is unreal. And number three, very important, number three, which explains the first two. He said, Brahman is the universe. So again, Brahman is real. The universe is unreal. And Brahman is the universe. So, as we say, there's only God. Only God appearing to play all roles in perfect harmony. Every individual plays the perfect role. You see it. So in entrepreneurship, for example, you'll see the physical assets, the digital assets, the intangible assets, the relationships naturally and effortlessly and spontaneously emerge to play a role that contributes to your vision, and not just your vision. Everyone that's involved in relation to their vision. And the grand vision, you can say, of thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so how does one abide in truth or be as that, even though they're already that? Well, it was articulated very well in the book Power of Kabbalah by Yuda Berg. Power of Kabbalah by Yuda Berg. I brought this up in a recent video. It has a foreword written by Madonna. It says something very simple. If I was to summarize this book, it's essentially to not react, to allow the light in. To not react, to allow the light in. So you are already that. You may or may not know what it looks like in imagination. By that it's meant, you know that you are that perfection, that fulfillment. Your real nature is Ananda, peace, bliss, happiness, joy. You experience that for no reason. So you may have a vision. You imagine yourself to be that which you desire to be. You imagine yourself to live the way you desire to live. You are already that. You know you are that in imagination. Now, some might not understand that, might not make any sense. All things exist in imagination. And out of all the things that exist in imagination, we desire to experience our perfection or fulfillment in form. That is what we desire to experience. You are completely fulfilled. You know that you are that prior to all these things, completely fulfilled as perfection in a meditation, in flow. Or as I say sometimes, you could do nothing to be. By that it is meant not identify. And also power of Kabbalah, don't react. And the light, which is that pure consciousness bliss. I am that pure awareness. My real nature is bliss. How do I know? I experience that in consciousness. Bliss, happiness, peace, joy. That's Ananda. So Sat Chit Ananda. Now, I can experience that in form as invention, innovation, entrepreneurial breakthroughs, etc. And then play that theater, the entrepreneurial theater. I create this product or service. It benefits people greatly. They give me compensation, etc., etc. That's part of the play of life. You may not imagine what it is, yet it still emerges in form. Like, for example, you can go to a date and you have no idea how this date is going to play out. No idea. You didn't imagine it was going to go this way or that way. Yet you know you are that absolute bliss. So it plays out in a blissful way. You end up in a wonderful experience. You go here, you go there, you have this conversation, that conversation. Wonderful. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to go on a second date with this person. It doesn't mean you're going to end up in a relationship with them. Yet it means that you have a wonderful time because you are experiencing yourself, which is the self. They're experiencing themselves, which is the self. There's only the self. And by that, it is meant, again, Adi Shankara, he said, Brahman is real, the universe is unreal, and Brahman is the universe. So it only appears illusory or disconnected or, as I say, not harmonious in the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, based on conditioning, when the universe is thought of as being separate from you, which is illusory. It clearly is. It just does not appear that way through conditioning. So the relationship plays out harmoniously. Now, you may go on a second date with them. That happens naturally. You may end up in a relationship with them. That happens naturally. You're not going to try to force yourself to get in a relationship with them or force yourself to go on a second date with them, because we know that's based on condition. If the individual is honest with themselves, they'll say, you know what? Why I was rushing this relationship or rushing them to do this or that is because I condition that if they do that, then I can be happy. You see how these conditions distort reality? If the individual says, if they do this or that, then I can be happy, that's clearly illusory and generates suffering. Because then they try to force, control, manipulate, pretend to be someone that they're not. That's based on conditioning. Yet, if they remain as that, which is that which they are, truth just is, that truth, be as is, that is perfection, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. John 8:32, they are free prior to all these things. And so they're free to be who they are on the date, in the business, etc. And all these things naturally, spontaneously emerge. The environments, the behaviors, the capabilities, even the values and beliefs can appear to transform. And this personal identity is like potter's clay. It's continuously transforming in a way that we can conceptualize what is happening. What is happening? The real self is shining forth. The real unconditional self is shining forth. And that is the self to be. You know, you may have heard this growing up. People would say to me all the time, just be yourself, be yourself. And I didn't know what they meant. I had no idea. I was like, what are you talking about? I am this condition, I am this, I am that limitation. Be myself, it doesn't work. What they were pointing to is what was prior to that. What was prior to those conditions. They were pointing to that, the self. Be the self. Be the self by letting go or surrendering the conditions to be the self. And that's how the personal identity, the values and beliefs, the capabilities, the behaviors, the environments transform. Now, you may know what it looks like in imagination, yet I can honestly say that it's not to limit that eternal, absolute, supreme perfection and fulfillment that you are. They're glimpses or symbols of that perfection. By that it is meant, I always share the story of when I read Think and Grow Rich, I was in $50,000 debt, and I imagined myself having $25,000 in my bank account, which represents being out of debt. Debts would have been cleared out, etc. That was symbolic. So that was a symbol of that perfection. I imagined that. I had a desire to be that and experience that. What can sound nebulous, like you are that perfection, you are that fulfillment. In form, you desire to experience that in form. Nothing wrong with that. So you experience that in form. No shame, no condemnation. And the conditions were dissolved along the way, and I experienced that in form. And then I set the next definite achieve fame, the next one, the next one, the next one, and they all happen. Because they are symbols of that perfection or symbols of that fulfillment. You're already that. So you can imagine that. You have a vision. Like Nikola Tesla, for example, he had a vision. That is the way it is. Thou shalt decree a thing, and it shall be established unto thee, and the light shall shine upon thy ways. How can someone decree a thing with such confidence? Because they know they are that. And they can imagine that perfection. They know that they are that perfection. They know that they are fulfillment, and they can naturally and effortlessly imagine that perfection and fulfillment in form. And that invention or innovation plays a role with other individuals, which again is the self. It's the self pushed out, that perfection pushed out, that fulfillment pushed out, and not the conditions. These conditions are just dissolving. They're falling away. We just don't identify with them. Just don't identify with the conditions. Again, power of Kabbalah. Not react. No fight, no flight, no freeze, no fawn response. Just pure light of consciousness appearing in form. And I might not know what that looks like. So at times I might know what that looks like. At times I don't know what it looks like. But I know what it feels like. It feels like myself, Ananda, Satchit Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. It feels like myself, joy, happiness, peace, bliss. That is the feeling of self. Prove the point. Beyond these conditions, not identified, in a meditation, while in flow, while doing what you love to do. Does it not feel, without trying to feel, joy, happiness, peace, bliss? Does it not feel like happiness, like joy, the joy of simply existing, the bliss of simply existing. Now, this might not make any sense to the individual that's identified with conditioning. That's why I say, don't take my word for it. Just be as you are. Dissolve that conditioning. Be as that prior to all these things. You are that prior to all these things. Or as I say, these thoughts that suggest otherwise appear to disappear. You just don't identify with them. Similar to the 7-Day Mental Diet by Emmett Fox. And then I also made a video on the 7-Day Mental and Emotional Diet, which just means allow the emotions to be, allow the thoughts to be. What remains? What remains is you as that perfection, as that fulfillment. So that's what I meant by all desire points to is that, whether it be symbolic in form, like, for example, getting out of debt, moving up in my corporate career, building my IT business to success, etc., or desire to be as that, Sat Chit Ananda, and then naturally what emerges in mind and body are the blissful thoughts, or what was represented in Philippians 4:8, whatsoever things are true, lovely, honest, just, good rapport. I like that word, just. Truth, justice. Be as is, that is perfection. And the feeling of that naturally emerges. The wonderful feeling. And it can be experienced as ecstatic bliss, peace, happiness, joy. It doesn't mean that one of those is better than another. That's why I like using the word ananda, because ananda can be translated into these words. In the English language, you might say, okay, peace is this, and joy is that, and happiness is this. The fragrance of being is ananda. Prior to all these things, naturally emerging, not toxic positivity, trying to get to this emotional point, naturally emerging as, and then appearing as all these things that are symbols of. So you can honestly say then, oh yeah, I'm having a lot of joy in the state. I'm having a lot of joy running my business. It appears to be easeful, effortless, and that is flow. Which is why I say, when I was bringing up the entrepreneurial example, innovation, sales, marketing, operations, finance, leadership, optimization, automation, delegation, elimination, part or in whole or in combination, the prospecting, the lead generation, the client acquisition, the ongoing business with existing clients, the emergence of the physical assets, the digital assets, the intangible assets, and the relationships that all play a role appear to be happening your style, which is the best style. Your style. So practically speaking, we say, okay, the entrepreneur built a business their way, which is the best way, their style. They weren't trying to copy someone else's style because they thought that they were not the wisdom. I am that wisdom. You know the answer. It can appear one step at a time, or it could appear in a book, it could appear in a conversation or whatever. And you know it's that. Like in All Matters of the Heart, Steve Jobs said in his commencement speech, I used to watch that over and over again when I was building my IT business. Like in All Matters of the Heart, you know. So I just found this video to be helpful. Let's conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You could say, I know that I am that. Thus all desire points to already being that which I desire to be. From this sure foundation of fulfillment, perfection, all these things appear to be added on to me by grace and grace alone. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk with you soon. Take care.